For thousands of years, one single, really powerful idea drove an entire civilization to create some of the most amazing structures in human history. And you know what? It wasn't about conquest or wealth. It was about something way more profound, a blueprint for eternity. So let's dive into the master plan for the afterlife that literally built ancient Egypt. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the core belief that started it all, what I'm calling the cycle of life. Then, we'll see how that idea led them to build for eternity, create these incredibly detailed guides for the journey, and construct magnificent houses for their gods. And finally, we'll look at the unbelievable legacy this one idea left behind. To really get this civilization, you have to start with one fundamental question. I mean, you see the mummies, the tombs, all those funerary texts, and it's so easy to just think, wow, these people were obsessed with death. But what if we've been looking at it completely backwards? And this, right here, is the key to understanding everything. Their entire focus wasn't on the end of life, but on how to make it continue. It was a meticulously planned strategy, a massive civilization-wide project to achieve something we all kind of want: immortality. You see, this belief, the doctrine of resurrection and immortality, it came from the world right outside their door. They saw the sun rise, set, and then, without fail, rise again. They watched the Nile flood, pull back, and bring new life to the land every single year. To them, this cycle was proof that death was just a temporary interruption before you were reborn into an everlasting life. Okay, so if you're convinced you're going to live forever, well, you're going to need a permanent home for that eternity, right? This single idea kicked off an architectural evolution that is just staggering to think about, transforming simple graves into some of the most iconic buildings on the entire planet. You can literally watch the idea take shape in stone over centuries. It all started pretty humbly, with just oval pits dug in the sand. Then that evolved into these rectangular mud brick structures called mastabas, and then some genius had the idea to stack these mastabas on top of each other, creating the very first stepped pyramids, which, of course, eventually led to that perfect, iconic, true pyramid shape we all know today. And even in those super early burials, the details are just incredible. The body was placed in a squatting position, almost like a fetus, to symbolize rebirth. Their head would point south, but their face was turned west, towards the land of the dead. And they didn't go empty-handed. They were buried with food, drink, and tools, everything they'd need to get started in the next life. But here's the catch. For your spirit, your ka, to actually enjoy the afterlife, it needed to be able to find its way back to your body. This practical need led to the whole science of mummification, preserving the body so the spirit could recognize it. And just in case something went wrong, say the body was damaged, they created these lifelike statues as a backup. It was basically a spiritual insurance policy. All right, so you've got your eternal home, you've got your preserved body. But the afterlife was seen as a pretty dangerous place. It was filled with trials and divine judges. You were going to need a guide, a map, maybe even a book of cheat codes. And this need led to the creation of some of the world's very first religious texts. And what's so fascinating is you can see a kind of democratization of the afterlife over time. At first, in the Old Kingdom, only the royals got a guide, the pyramid texts carved right onto their tomb walls. Then, by the Middle Kingdom, nobles and even some commoners could get in on the action, with the coffin texts written on their coffins. And finally, in the New Kingdom, pretty much anyone who could afford it could have a personalized papyrus scroll, the famous Book of the Dead. The very first of these guides, the pyramid texts, they were first found in the pyramid of King Unas, and inside there was a collection of 759 different spells and prayers. Their one and only job? To protect the king and make sure he had a good time in the next world. But as these texts became available to more and more people, they started to reflect more, well, everyday concerns. I love this quote from the coffin texts. It isn't some grand theological statement. It's a simple, very human plea for the basic comforts of life to just continue into the next. And yeah, commoners wanted more than just bread and beer. The coffin texts introduced all new magic spells designed to help you reunite with your whole family in the afterlife. They also included spells to get out of doing manual labor, which is where those famous Shabti statues come in. They were these little figurines meant to do all your farming for you in the fields of eternity. Pretty smart, right? So the evolution just keeps going. By the New Kingdom, we get what the Egyptians actually called the Book of Coming Forth by Day. We know it as the Book of the Dead, and it expanded to around 200 chapters. It was basically the ultimate comprehensive guide to beating every challenge the underworld could throw at you. These guides were often beautifully illustrated and written on papyrus scrolls. But the most famous section by far is Chapter 125. This is the final judgment. Your heart was literally weighed on a scale against the feather of truth, right in front of the god Osiris and 42 other divine judges. If you passed, you got eternal life. But if you failed, your heart was devoured. No pressure. But it wasn't all just about the individual's journey. To make sure the universe stayed in balance, which, by the way, was essential for anyone to get to the afterlife, the Egyptians knew they had to keep the gods happy. And that meant building them some seriously spectacular homes. So the Egyptian word for temple was hut nitter. It literally translates to house of the god, and building these was the king's #1 job. It was like a cosmic deal. The king builds a home for the god, and in return, the god maintains cosmic order, what they called ma'at, which gave every single Egyptian a shot at a peaceful eternity. Now, the earliest shrines were probably simple structures made of plants and wood, long gone now. But they quickly evolved into these massive, monumental stone buildings, like this reconstructed Sun Temple from the Old Kingdom. These places were designed to be a direct link between Earth and the divine. By the time of the New Kingdom, they had the temple design perfected, and it was a symbolic journey. You'd pass through this massive pylon entrance into a bright, open courtyard. From there, the path led you into the growing darkness of a dense, man-made forest of columns, the hypostyle hall, before you finally reached the absolute heart of the temple, the secret, hidden chamber of the god itself. But these temples were so much more than just ancient churches. They were the administrative and cultural hearts of all of Egypt. Kings carved their military victories on the walls. Coronations were celebrated there. And these huge temple complexes also had homes for priests, workshops, granaries, and even schools and libraries. They were the center of everything. So, when we put all these pieces together, the tombs, the texts, the temples, we start to see the true legacy of this ancient, powerful idea. In the end, the pyramids, the Valley of the Kings, the incredible art, the complex theology, none of it was random. All of it was the logical result of one single powerful belief. This idea of an eternal afterlife wasn't just part of their culture, it was their culture's blueprint. The Egyptians built in stone for eternity, and they left behind an undeniable record of what they cared about. And it kind of leaves us with a final thought. If the things we build outlast us and tell our story, what are the skyscrapers, the server farms, and the satellites of our modern world going to tell future civilizations about what we truly value?